right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am here today with Landon Starbuck. She is a mom of 3. She is the wife to someone who is currently running for Congress, Robbie Starbuck. And she is just started, you can see her background, the Freedom Forever, which is a foundation about a topic that I was just telling her off there that I'm so glad that somebody's really tackling this head on, because I think it's kind of the underpinnings of so many of the issues that we're seeing, certainly in this country today, but definitely globally, really. And I think that, we are, I always say we're kind of in a, it's a kind of like a us against the powers that be globally. Kind of fight. And I think that really is kind of the linchpin of a lot of it. So it's really great that you're doing this. I'm super excited to kind of dive in, find out a little bit more about what you're doing, why, and why now. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. And I'm so excited to be on your podcast. And so few people want to talk about these hard issues. So I'm always excited to find somebody that is engaged in these issues and this difficult topic. And offering a nuanced, long form conversation like this is awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think we, that whole notion of that you shouldn't discuss politics and religion is actually very much the opposite. I think, how do children learn critical thinking if they don't discuss difficult subjects? So I say, let's dive right in.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
Right. So tell me a little bit about the foundation and tell us how you got started in this and why you decided to tackle this topic and why now? Yeah.
Yeah, well, my name is Landon Starbuck. I left Hollywood as a billboard charting artist. I was exposed to a lot of exploitation that occurred in that industry, and that is part of an open sexual quid pro quo system. So the entertainment industry as a whole, as many are figuring out now, is very exploitive. And there have been so many people throughout the years that have talked about this issue. But I wanted to take it a step further. I didn't want to just talk about the exploitation in Hollywood. I wanted to talk about the exploitation and trafficking that's happening all over, but particularly of our most vulnerable, which is children. And so that is what motivated me to. I had been before serving in various capacities with different organizations in the counter trafficking space, but I wanted to touch on the subjects that many are afraid or unwilling to touch on, such as the border crisis, and more sensitive topics like the grooming in schools with the radical sex ed, and just sensitive social and political topics. I saw a space and a need for that. And so I started my own nonprofit, Freedom Forever, so that we could dive right into those things boldly and start declaring truth and fighting it in an effective way, which we're doing as a prevention-based activism organization. So we're all volunteer led, and that means we don't take salaries, but we arm ourselves kind of like Project Veritas. And we use various skills, investigative journalism, our marketing expertise, using the power of media to transform minds, to educate, inform, inspire, and activate. So we do all of those things, and we're just getting started.
Wow, that's awesome. So you came from Hollywood and you were a singer, right?
Yes.
Singer, musician. Awesome. How long did you do that? And what, I know so much of certainly we don't need to talk about, like, it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of sexual exploitation in Hollywood. I think that's pretty evident to everyone. But there's also, I think a lot of people don't necessarily know how much of the target and how much trafficking actually happens through the industry itself, and how a lot of times it's kind of like a front for that. So I'm just curious, your experience in the industry, and if you had ever witnessed or been exposed to any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up, my mom was a model, and I was thrust into that arena of modeling and acting as a child. I did not have a typical childhood experience. I came from a broken home, which rendered me more vulnerable to not just exploitation, but missing those signs and red flags. So I had to learn, the hard way of just navigating that myself. I was an only child. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a significant family member that stepped up that took on that role for me to help me navigate that world. So I've always sort of been a one woman army here, navigating through the pitfalls of society and everything. And so when I moved to Hollywood, when I turned 18, I was very naive. I didn't know anybody. And so I interned under various producers, and I finally landed a record deal. And then that got taken away from me. So there's so many different stories. I'm really not sure like which one to hone in on, but it took me a while to ultimately discover that Hollywood, the entertainment industry, runs on a sexual quid pro quo system, which means that you could be the best singer, the best actress, the best at your art form, and still not get certain opportunities or jobs because there'd be other people or women or young women that were willing to, exploit themselves in some way, or sleep with the director, or compromise their integrity or their values. And that's how it works. And if you're not willing to do that, you get labeled difficult to work with. The word goes around pretty quickly, and it's harder to come by opportunities. So you have to work a lot harder to get the same footing, essentially, which is fine because it refined my character. I'm not going back and saying I'm a victim. I'm so happy that I learned this, and that I had those experiences, because it fuels my mission today. And so I think that there is a purpose in all of that I witnessed. And I was not trafficked myself. I was not raped in Hollywood, but I was exposed to a lot of that. And that's a hard line for me, because while I want to speak truth and share other people's stories, they're their stories to tell. And some of them actually have started telling them, and people don't always listen. So when these girls in Hollywood, which I would say more than not have been raped, if that's the norm, that's a problem in itself, right? But they come out and they talk about it, and very little is done. And then you look at like the hypocrisy of the Me Too movement, and then those same women who champion that go around and work with the same directors and pedophiles that they are claiming to be in opposition against or feel victimized by. So it's really mind-boggling, and it kind of self-imploded, and then set us back far back for victims who want to be taken seriously. So it was I think overall a very destructive movement. I mean, I guess the one positive takeaway is that it kind of pulled the curtain back on the sexual quid pro quo system and the veneer of what people think the entertainment industry is.
Yeah, for sure. I think I do think that, I think in general, I always say the Great Awakening is going to combat the Great Reset. So I think in general, there's a lot of awareness that is coming to the surface on a lot of issues, but certainly I think people are becoming much more wise to Hollywood and the music industry. I think the music industry in particular, I don't know how familiar you are with you may be because of your background, but like Circo and RCA, and some of their ties to like the intelligence agencies. Are you familiar with some of that?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of that, but I do know on the whole that our, intelligence agencies have been involved in Hollywood for decades. So yeah, that includes music, it includes entertainment. They have offices and things like that, so they can inject their social political motivations and ideas.
For sure. And of course, MK Ultra, right? Hollywood's kind of like a front for MK Ultra. Have you witnessed any? I know you said, and it's certainly, I wouldn't ask you to share somebody else's story. I personally have. I've talked to people who have been trafficked and MK Ultra'd, and certainly brought up through, either through the entertainment industry or not. And it's some of these stories are really just, they're horrifying. Yeah.
They really are. I'm very familiar with it. I've worked with a lot of different survivors with different backgrounds. some of which came from the entertainment industry as well. And, that I think that all of that needs to be taken seriously and investigated, and that the recourses and channels for those women who were at the time, or men, young women, young boys, were at the time exploited in Hollywood or any capacity, should always be investigated and exploited. And anytime there's barriers there, you have to question why.
Right. Yeah. So speaking of barriers, and I'm really curious because you said you have kind of like a Project Veritas style thing going with the investigative journalist, which I love that, because I think so much of this does happen in secrecy. And, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of like the secret societies, and, that everything is really under a very tight lid. So how do we, or do you have any plans for how do you expose that, and how do you expose those connections, and what can be done about it?
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many issues, and what I try to do is make a difference where I can, because here's the thing, there's so much talk about, some stuff labeled as conspiratorial, and then there's stuff that is labeled conspiratorial that's not a conspiracy, and then there's stuff that's directly planted conspiracy to make the stuff that's being labeled that not, right? It gets all messed up and muddled. But the reality is this is what I always say is a blanket statement. Any way a human being that you can fathom being exploited on this earth is happening. So that's not a conspiracy. Anything horrible you've probably heard is probably happening and true. There are ritual sacrifices. There are things like this that exist globally. There are high-level trafficking rings. These are facts. You can link to them. They've been exposed. So where do we make a difference, right? Because we can't investigate everything that is either labeled a conspiracy or not. We have to do the work to deep dive it and uncover the things that are right in front of us that we're not working on, right? And the things that we can do right now are things like the border. We know children every day. You can go see trafficking every single day if you go down to that border. I did. We went down there in September, and we did the largest coalition march to draw awareness to the trafficking. So this is something we can actively show up for and intervene, whether that means helping with services for those children, helping submit FOIA requests to expose what they're hiding, the numbers, so that they can control that narrative. We have to dig in and see, in this particular situation, how can we make a difference? And that is what I'm focused on, because I think a lot of the traps that people get into is that they want to talk about trafficking in a sensational entertainment way, right? In a way that's like people coming out of helicopters and rescuing children. And that's just not the reality of how it takes place. And it's not the reality of how we're going to be effective as activists truly wanting to make a difference, not just be entertained by it. And so I particularly find it like, when there's real survivors of some of this horrible stuff we're talking about, they don't want us sitting and just going, oh my gosh, that's awful. Oh, did you hear this? This is what they do to children and babies. Oh, that serves no purpose. Sure. And what they want is for us to do something about it. And so whenever I speak or, nationally or anything like that, I don't tell those stories. I let the survivors tell their stories if they want to tell their stories. But I focus on the activism, because it'll eat you alive. Hearing all of these horror stories, at least for someone like me, I'm very empathetic, that will destroy me. And it did for a period of time. And then I picked myself off the floor crying about it and said, what am I going to do about it? And so that is where I'm laser focused on what can we do that we're not doing, right? So that's what I'm doing with this organization, the border stuff, child exploitation happening on the internet all over the place, right in front of us. The reporting system on that, completely flawed. You can report something to Polaris, they might not answer the phone. They have a text messaging thing, they might not answer their text. It's hit and miss. That's inexcusable in this country. Same thing with, when you're reporting CSAM, child sexual abuse material. I have a laundry list. And the only way I'm going to get to that laundry list is if we have active, engaged volunteers and activists. And that's where we're at now.
Right.
So sign up.
Yeah, awesome. So when you say, so what kinds of things, so your focus, correct me if I'm wrong, you said your focus is kind of on the border right now. Is that where you're, okay.
That's one of our missions. And so before we were had all of our paperwork in and organized under Freedom Forever. All of the volunteer, activists and organizers that help me with that are part of this organization. So we consider that one of our first missions, and that it's an ongoing mission because obviously that issue is not solved. But we are putting pressure on politicians to act. We don't know how short-lived those actions will be, but as long as we maintain pressure, as long as we engage the public awareness and give them tools on how to put pressure, on how to create change and inspire activism on that level, we are going to see changes. We are going to see accountability. And that part of that puzzle piece is submitting those FOIA requests and exposing the numbers that they're hiding. So recently, it was months ago, Mayorkas was being interviewed by Senator Ted Cruz, and he asked him, point blank, how many children have been trafficked across our border? How many have been raped? How many rapes have been reported to the sexual abuse hotline? And they just play dumb. They either are playing dumb or they're intentionally ignoring it, right? And I think you know which one it is. So this is what we have to uncover, and it takes time. It takes a lot of grit and hard work to do. So that's why we're rallying resources now so that we can accomplish those goals.
Right. That's great. That is great. I guess my question is like, what, because so much of this is done kind of covertly, right? And we know a little bit about it, we certainly know certain organizations that this is what they do. But to find who, where, how, that seems to be much more of a challenge. So I'm kind of curious, and I understand what you're saying, like we need to take action where we can. I'm a firm believer in that, like otherwise it just kind of feels hopeless and then nobody does anything, right? So the problem persists. So you need to take the action where you can take it. But I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, how do we tackle that? Because this problem is, while the border is a huge issue, this problem is way bigger than the border. I mean, as you said, like, our very own intelligence agencies are involved in, in doing this. So, and everything they do is classified. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I mean, this is where, it gets tricky. So I'm taking off the Freedom Forever hat, and just as Landon Starbuck answering this question, political activism is very important because the people, if we disengage and just say, okay, we're black pill, the whole system's screwed,
right.
I don't want to engage, everybody's paid off and bought and paid for, the system itself, yes, the system itself is broken. But if we don't try to, if you think of this as a war, if we don't try to send in our best warriors, then we might as well just forfeit to begin with, like we've lost them, we've admitted defeat. So refusing to engage in the process or ourselves stand up and say, I'm that person. I might not trust anybody else, but I trust myself. I'm going to stand, in the gap here, and I'm going to try. And in that process of trying, like we're seeing with my husband's campaign, we're uncovering a lot of corruption, and people need to see that, because if they don't see that and experience it for themselves, nothing will change with the system. And so that process itself is essential into fixing what is broken. And I'm learning that every single day, just being a part of this campaign and witnessing what we have to go through with the establishment, and just disgusting attacks and it's psychological political warfare, and it's gross, and we have to deal with it every day because this is uncovering something bigger.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I guess that's so how can people, what would you say to like the every person? I'm sure there's certainly like a lot of moms and, parents in general who are really concerned about this. And just, everyday people, I think they want to feel like they have some, again, you said like most people don't even want to talk about this, but I think part of why they don't want to talk about it is because one, people don't want to acknowledge that evil exists, and this is really like, if you want to talk about evil, this is like, the pinnacle of really, it's just so unfathomable that this could really be happening. So a lot of people just want to ignore it and brush it under the rug. And then I think other people feel like what can they do? They feel powerless.
Right.
So
right. What you just mentioned is what I ran into and hit my head against the wall so many times with, because I would fly across the country and speak to this big group of people, and I wasn't giving them something to act on. So I failed, and I thought that just changing their hearts emotionally with, look what's happening, here's the problem, here's the statistics, I thought that would be enough, and it's not. And so that's one of the things too that we're along with the survivor that serves on the board of my organization, we created a survivor informed prevention manual. So it's called the Freedom Model, because there's not a manual, there's not a real tangible things people can do, and a way that conceptualizes the problem and brings it down on a level we can all understand, right? I mean, sure, we have national reports that aren't always accurate about trafficking and different, through the left lens of what's happening and what the vulnerabilities are and how they're being exploited. But we don't have truth. We don't have exactly why those vulnerabilities are exploited and what the access points are and how we engage the public, not just law enforcement and all that, but how we connect those dots to get people working together to find missing children, to get people working together to change laws where, right now, for an example, foster care kids, when they go missing, which I'm sure you're aware of, that a lot of the children that have been found in these sex trafficking stings came from the foster care, broken child protective welfare agencies. They're called different things in different states, but we know that about 70 to 80% were from foster care. And then when foster care kids run away, they stop looking for them after a period of time. If it's a normal child from an intact family, there's an Amber Alert issued, right? Sure. So all of these little changes and protocols on a micro scale have to be fixed and changed, because it's perpetuating, the cycle of children running away, nobody looking for them, and then no wonder they're trafficked. These are things that are so common sense, and you and I talking about them, it just seems silly, like that's really a thing. Yeah, it is, and nobody else is coming to fix it. That's the underlying message that I try to, express, that there's not some trafficking agency or some trusted government anything that's going to come fix this problem. There's not even a group that can tackle all of this stuff. It's you and I, like we're it.
Right. Wow. And that is daunting. What are some signs, like, because it doesn't happen all at once, right? So I'm sure there are signs. Are there things that people can be on the lookout for to see if somebody may be being targeted, or if their child is being a target, or?
Right. So some people talk about the signs, which there are physical signs in, physical reality of seeing a kid who can't make eye contact, who might have visible bruises, who has an adult near them, or somebody that is seeming to overpower them. There's those physical signs. Those are available like all over online. But what isn't easily accessible that people need to know about are the vulnerabilities. And some people believe that poverty is the root cause of trafficking. Like, I think it's one major anti-trafficking organization constantly puts out propaganda that, it's poverty that causes it. It's not poverty that causes it. Nobody's vulnerability causes trafficking. So it's the vulnerabilities that we need to look for as the entry points and to trafficking and exploitation. Because the reality is that we have an epidemic of child sexual abuse material being traded online. Millions, we're talking 70 plus millions of files of this, and it's video, mostly video content and images of children. And not only is it not being properly investigated and it's online, but the resources to go and find those children and to prevent it in the first place, are not there. And we have social media companies, actively profiting off of it and promoting this and to this content of what makes children vulnerable to children. And so parents need to have the message. And if we actually had a functioning public health, department, they would designate pornography as a public health crisis that it is, even though it's been designated as such in 17 states on a state level. But we would also have them, recognizing that child exploitation is an epidemic. And if that step is taken, then we recognize that the vulnerabilities are children who do not have intact, strong families. And what do we see right now? What is the biggest risk factor in America? Attack on the nuclear family. So that means that we have a whole increase of vulnerable children that are likely to be exploited, which explains why some of the more targeted children now are the LGBT children, or the children that, are confused about their identity, right? Or transitioning, all of those things, because those kids are intentionally being rendered vulnerable. And until we focus on that access point and parents start speaking up on that, like, we can't really solve the trafficking problem. And, I always say this: rescuing kids doesn't solve the problem. It's a great thing. We still need to do it. There's a lot of organizations designated to do that. But if we don't focus on the prevention, we will always have children needing rescuing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I guess that's kind of my question. Like, how do we prevent this?
So, okay, part of the freedom model is that prevention. So number one, the best way for parents to protect kids from online sexual exploitation, which is the majority of trafficking and sexual exploitation is taking place online, is to not have your kids online. And that doesn't mean that you have to be like, shut the windows to the world and not have your kids on tech. My son's 9, he builds websites, he codes, but it's safe tech. It's ways to engage their innovation and their creativity without exposing them to a world they're not prepared for, that they don't have the digital self-defense skills for. And that is a really big one. And it's easier said than done, but a lot of work has to go into that piece, because socially, we've been indoctrinated to think this is normal and healthy, even when we have kids, committing suicide at crazy rates, and anxiety and depression. Just the mental health issues alone should be enough to message on this issue, but they don't, because they profit off of it. And then the sexual exploitation is the final piece of dismantling the identity of children and stealing their innocence. And so it's explaining that, because you have to, in order to understand the activism, you have to understand why it's being done, the Marxist agenda behind it, the globalist sexual rights agenda, why they're promoting porn, why UNICEF said that, porn isn't necessarily harmful. There's no evidence it's harmful to children. Why would they say something like that? UNICEF, a global organization that aims to protect children and prevent exploitation, right? So there's a lot of work that has to connect the dots in this little book and manual. And then it's connected directly to what you can do about it. So the other thing is getting porn out of schools, taking over the education system, pulling your kids out of it when it's not possible. If parents aren't willing to do the work to fight every day and be at the school board meetings and run for school board, then school choice, which we should be fighting for, anyway. But it's very specific, all of these mitigation strategies to reduce the vulnerabilities. And that is the most effective way to reduce that, because the other safeguard is having a strong father, male role model, masculine figure in the home. Out of all the survivors that I've spoken with, if I ask the question, was your daddy there when you were exploited? They would all answer no, with the exception of the ones whose dads were involved in the exploitation. And that is something important to touch on, because most of child sexual abuse, CSA, is somebody the child knows. But when we're looking at exploitation, it can be somebody they know, but it also can be somebody they meet online. And those breakdowns and analytics, are a lot to unpack. But that's another risk factor for parents to be aware of, that any adult you're trusting your child alone with, try to reduce that, in any capacity, and have, oversight there. So whether they're being dropped off at a church, find out what where their cameras are, what their prevention strategy is to prevent sexual abuse. If they don't have a strategy for preventing sexual abuse, it is likely that sexual abuse can occur, because guess who knows that? Pedophiles. And we all know a pedophile. Across America, over 500 pedophiles will submit requests to have sex with children when they do these things. That's across America, rural, big cities, doesn't matter. And so that's another intervention point, is why are we having an epidemic of pedophiles? Why are men turning to this? And that connects back to the porn. And so it's a tangled web. And the reason we did this book is because I could sit here and throw all this at you and somebody would probably want to run out the door, So we try to, again, conceptualize and make it tangible, and just give people a to-do list. Here's the to-do list. Here's the model, so that we don't
have action. Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting point when you're talking about, the pedophiles and the porn. And I'm wondering if you're seeing, I mean, I'm sure you have 3 children, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How old are they? You said
13,
9?
9, and 5.
Wow. Yeah. So I don't, and are they all in the public school system or?
No, we took
No.
them out of private and public and then put them in another private micro school situation.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to hear about that, but first I want to say, so I'm sure you possibly witnessed, so if not with your own children, but certainly, there's a lot of grooming going on currently, right? And they're really, it seems like they're very adamant about teaching very young children about sex and, very kind of deviant sex, like kind of perversity, essentially. And I can't help but think it's kind of tied to this, the bigger agenda that is, in my mind, pretty sinister, because it's kind of like conditioning them, right, to be okay with this and to normalize this. And I think some of the this is my feeling, but I'm really curious your perspective on this, especially as a mom. But some of the like they're the trans stuff that they're really pushing, and yeah, I don't know, to me it doesn't seem like this is separate. I think that they're pretty intertwined. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think the outcomes and statistics bear that out just alone. Like if we're just examining those ideas, which these are gender theory, sexual theory, radical sex, these, critical race theory. Since when was it normal to just inject theories into, lower academia and start teaching kids theories? I don't know when that became okay, probably when the corporate controlled academia said it was okay, and it trickled down from there. But there is a global agenda, and it's Marxism, and to be technical, neo-Marxism, but it's all the same, and with the same goal of being to destabilize a nuclear family. And why is that so important? Not just being a tenet of Marxism, but it's important because for them to get their agenda, true transfer of power to the elites, whatever you want to call them, because there's so many that benefit that would be under that category. You have to dismantle the nuclear family because that is the strongest connection to what they hate, which is American values, capitalism, freedom, and child innocence. Child innocence, they believe, is fundamentally connected to cis heteronormativity or white supremacy culture. So they don't just see kids as like moldable minds to turn into activists. They see them as equals. And a byproduct of that, no matter how many kids get sexually abused and traumatized, is to them a justification of the greater good. And that's the only way I can think of to explain it, is because they won't outright yet endorse pedophilia. They're doing that different ways, right? To soften
Some places they have. I mean, in California, they flat out have. So
I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point. If people are paying attention, it's obvious to us. But and it's the bait and switch of what they always do, right? Because they say, okay, how did this come in? It came in under SEL, social emotional learning, and they used all the right buzzwords to get parents hooked and trusting. And then parents, looked away, and then they found out their kids were being taught critical race theory. It's the same thing right now. They're not overtly saying we're teaching pedophilia to your children. What they're doing is they're turning children into sexual creatures and tapping into a sexuality prematurely so that they will demand their own autonomy before they're ready, their sexual autonomy. And that's why they call it sexual rights. So they believe that children are their own people, deserving of their own rights, and that parents are a problem in that way. And so that's why they're removing parental rights. But again, it connects back to that dismantling of the family, a greater agenda. And not everybody that's working on the removing parental rights and injecting the sex ed is aware of this, right? So they're just useful in this. And so it is all connected because it's about destabilizing the child, detaching them from their parents and their values, because now you have a kid that thinks their parents are bigots, thinks their parents are rejecting their true identity, which All of these identities are completely superficial. None of them are about your character or who you are as a person, or what you want to offer to this world. They're all superficial. Your color, your skin, these superficial identities. So that's what, no wonder these kids are miserable making these crazy TikTok videos with blue hair and horns in their nose. And it's indicative. Their outward appearance is indicative of the chaos inside. It's just a reflection of that. And that's, it's not individualism at all. Like they're conforming, all of them, but just to an extreme, but they're conformists, and it's its own religion. So yeah, it's all connected.
It's absolutely a religion. It's interesting you brought up Marxism, and I mean, this is, I don't know if you're familiar, Marx wrote odes to Satan. Like he was an avowed Satanist, like literally wrote odes to Satan. And he was a plagiarist to boot, and he plagiarized actually a lot of the secret society manuscripts. So like the Communist Manifesto basically came out of, Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati Manifesto, and several others. There was a French quote unquote philosopher, but also connected to the secret societies. And so Marx was kind of the public arm, and he was commissioned, he was paid. He happened to be really brilliant, but he was a plagiarist. So all of these, I think what's fascinating though, is that it's been so removed from that. And, it's been aimed as being this compassionate kind of a thing, when it's flat out evil, and it's an evil religion. And, they make this argument about, keeping religion out of the schools, and you can't have the 10 Commandments anywhere, because that's a horrible thing.
Right.
Which, I mean, even if you're not a Christian, I don't know how anybody's hurt by seeing the 10 Commandments. They're basically like, do good in the world, be a good person. So even if you don't believe in whatever religion, I don't know that anybody should be harmed by that, but they're really adamant about that. And yet they accept all of this, which is it is religion. It meets all the confines of religion. It's just a anti-Christian religion. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on any of that? And
yeah, I've thought about that often, that, they're anti-theory, but only their theories are allowed, because they say our religion, our faith is our theory, right? And it has no place in school, only facts. But yet they inject their religion and their theories in. And I think that that is an effective strategy to tie this to religious motivations, because it is, it has tenets, it has tithing, it has all of these components of a religion. They're just not calling themselves that, so that they don't have to subscribe to the same boundaries and limitations. And pretty brilliant scheme of these dark forces to do that this way, to create division from within and implode American society. So yeah, I think what was the question?
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's a lot. It's a lot of different arms and stuff.
I was going somewhere with it, and then I got distracted with another thought.
What are your thoughts on, really honing in on the fact that this is I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but this is my opinion. It's a satanic religion, and it's a cult. It's both. When you're talking about the conformity, it's cult-like behavior. And we know that there is, Marxism is it meets the criteria of being kind of a religion. And so why is that okay? And why are we permitting that? Why are we not tackling this as, the cults and religions should not be in schools?
Right. Yes. Thank you. And I remember what I was going to say about that is, if we were to have a teacher, right, say, hey, this weekend I went to church, and, I gave my heart to the Lord, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, they'd be fired. Right. So, but yet we can have a teacher talk about their activism, and that they were at a BLM march, and then they can have a BLM flag and a rainbow flag and trans, and pledge allegiance to, the LGBTQ plus or whatever flag in their classroom. They are doing this intentionally. They know that it's, the same thing, what they're doing. But it's interesting that nobody has tried that. I just wondered, I'm like, how come nobody has just tried to expose that hypocrisy? Because that's exactly what it is. It's a religion, the way they're operating, and they don't have the same rules. I mean, really, Democrats don't have the same rules anyway. Just as we've seen the justice system play out, over these past 4 years plus. But I mean, this is the problem, is that there's not the same rules, and people think that if they sit back and do things the right way, that it'll all come out and it'll be fair, and it's not. And so it requires us to get involved.
For sure, for sure. So I'm curious, you moved here 3 years ago, was it?
Almost 4 years ago now. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What made you decide to move here, and what have you noticed any kind of differences? Yeah, your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
So I'm from the South. I'm from Texas. And I always wanted to raise my children with conservative values in a conservative area. But we also were in the entertainment industry, and that was, our livelihoods. So,
Sure.
we had to stay there. But ultimately, as we, realized that we were participating in a system we didn't like, I chose to leave first. And Robbie was still making videos, music videos and films and things like that. He came out in support of President Trump, and when he did that, and he stood up for his values, seeing where the country was on a downward socialism spiral and all of that trending, our kids were targeted, our family was ghosted, ostracized, canceled. So we were canceled before we even knew what canceling was, before cancel culture was a thing. Like, it was like we were canceled in silence, and it was an interesting thing, but it really was hard to watch your children, go through something like that at school and be bullied, and have the school do nothing about it, and instead tell your child that, well, there's consequences for your parents' actions. And so that was a lot to process at the time, but it made our entire family stronger, and it made our kids more resilient. And moving here, we ultimately realized, we can't change an area that is full of people that are of this mindset that like it. They like that, and I don't really feel like we would be so entitled, especially me not coming from there, to try to change those people if they're very happy with their ideology. So I, said, you know what? Well, I'm going to move where a place that already has my values. I'm from the South, and this is where I want to raise my kids. And so we made that decision to move to outside of Nashville. But, the reality is, when we got here, we had no intention of running for Congress or anything like that. When we got here, thinking we would be sipping sweet tea and rocking on our farm, on our front porch, we put a kid in a private school. And the first thing that happened was a poster of Che Guevara in the Spanish class. And then the Hispanic engagement or DEI person said that our kids were Latinx, and they started using that term in the classroom. It was one thing after another, constant indoctrination, constant leftism being injected. And, they're trying to raise up these little activist warriors for their cause. And I realized, wow, I feel really stupid. We're paying for this, number one. So then we went to public school where, it's a little bit different, but it was slightly less of that. But then the COVID crap started, right? And the masking, the forced masking. And we were not ever going to do that to our children. So we pulled them. I homeschooled, trying to, do all the stuff that we're doing. And we looked at the leadership, right? We looked and said, well, who's going to stand up for us? And found that the conservative or the Republican that we thought would be preserving the culture, not just in the South and Tennessee and the Bible Belt, but would be fighting, at least when it came time, to vote for the right things. And we found the opposite to be true. And we found that it's actually the people that call themselves Christian conservatives or Republican weren't doing that. And if they were, we wouldn't be running, right? We'd be building some incredible media company for alternative entertainment, right? Like the Daily Wire is doing. But there wasn't that option. And we're not going to leave our kids in a horrible spot where America is destroyed. And if freedom's destroyed, if they chip away at it the way they have been with forced masking, taking away your bodily autonomy to make your own medical decisions and handing that over to the government, it's just a matter of time. And so it was really a matter of looking around, like we touched on earlier, and nobody else is coming to save the day, standing up. I trust myself. I'm going to do something about it. And so here we are.
Wow. Yeah. So did you and Robbie work together? He directed music videos and you had a band, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how we met. He directed one of my music videos.
Mhm.
And then, it was not love at first sight, but right after that, it was a God thing. And then it was, love at first sight, that or second sight, I guess you could say. Fell in love madly and actually got married 3 months after we fell in love. But at the very beginning, I think, we both still had the, not mature in a lot of ways. So we were bumping heads.
Right. Well, some of us, it takes forever to, it takes our whole life to mature. I think I'm personally still on that journey, but
I think we all are.
right. Yeah.
Helping. And the person who says they're not, I, worry about those people.
Exactly. Right. What kind of music were you involved in? And are your kids involved in music, and are they familiar with like your work and yeah.
Yeah. So I've always loved music. I was a multi-instrumentalist, making music, gosh, professionally since I was 16, singing on hay barrels and at the mall and stuff in Texas. And I did pop, I did punk, I did alternative pop, and part of it, and then I did industrial and alternative music. And some of it was darker there for a period. And what some people don't understand is, well, I think they do understand because they've seen, many artists, but they might not understand that you don't always choose your marketing. This is the problem, is being a puppet. When you subscribe to the system, you sign a contract where, they have outfits and things for you, and you have some control to a degree, and then there are consequences for that. I remember them putting out for a video a like lingerie thing, and I'm like, I'm not wearing that, and that cost me that, gig. So, and I lost a tour after that. So there's consequences for that. But, I didn't cross certain lines that I wasn't comfortable with. But I also, I didn't believe evil really exists back then like in Hollywood. I didn't understand. I was naive. I was a kid. So when they were like changing the branding, making it darker, just to set you apart from the Katy Perry or the, other pop girls at the time, you kind of just thought it was okay. I'm not sleeping with anyone. I'm not doing drugs. I'm not doing any of these bad things. But, looking back, I wish, that I hadn't been exploited in that way. I didn't know I had a voice. I didn't know I could say no. And so I wish that, and I definitely impart this on my children, if they ever, choose to pursue anything in the entertainment realm or music or anything, is that, knowing your boundaries and knowing that how they exploit children and parents, right, that send their kids to these spaces, just thinking like this is a dream. And that's not how it plays out. You don't get to choose all your branding and how you want to portray yourself always. It's, it's a marketing machine. It's an entertainment machine. And so, I wouldn't recommend any parent putting their kids in that space. And if their kids genuinely love the arts, right, and it's not for the purpose of becoming an influencer and getting famous and making a lot of money, which I think in itself is not a healthy thing for any child to have that dream. But there's, local theater groups, there's, music, free YouTube videos, monitor your kids' YouTube. But you know what I'm saying? Like there's free resources for children to cultivate the arts, free, and to excel in that. So my son takes guitar lessons, and my daughter plays ukulele. Wow. And, I love music. It'll always be a part of my life. And, but for right now, I'm using my voice in different ways.
Sure. Yeah. And a very important way at that. So yeah, we're glad to have you in this fight for sure.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on, I know some parents get very caught up in kind of the, you were saying some of this work was a little bit darker and, that the messaging was going in that direction. What are your thoughts on kids being exposed to that? And yeah.
100%. I mean, so, okay. the FCC, you know how they will like clamp down on an account that is doing like a weight loss video, right? And then they have a whole case of like why that weight loss video was marketed to a underage minor who then had anorexia. Like they have whole cases for stuff like this. They
Sure.
don't do it for sexual exploitation. Why? You know, this is something that should be pursued vigorously. And one of the, you know, things on my laundry list of things I'd like to accomplish to go after these people. But essentially, they market sexual exploitation to young children intentionally. Like when I was in the industry, I was not aware, and this is kind of more pre-YouTube days, but I wasn't aware if my stuff would be marketed to children. It wasn't, thankfully, but other things are, and I'm not even sure some of the artists are aware. Definitely people who are aware is what was that guy with the creepy concert where people died? Can you remind me his name?
Recently
Yeah, was it Travis Scott?
The what?
Was it Travis Scott?
Yes, Travis Scott. Yes.
Yes. Okay, I didn't want to say the wrong name.
No,
but somebody like him, they do know it's intentionally marketed. Billie Eilish, she knows that her music is targeting young children. Yeah. And if parents, I mean, they're not recognizing that there's separate rules. Like, you know, it's like it's entertainment doesn't apply to the same as a stranger that would sit and talk to your kids about sex and whisper things like, I like it hard and dirty and stuff like that. But it's okay if it's like in a song coming through your kids' speakers. There's such a disconnect here. And so that's part of the work too, is helping people disconnect from the matrix of entertainment. And what we've allowed to in our homes to our children. It's our own responsibility to guard from all forms of sexual exploitation, not just the creepy guy in the van.
Right.
It's coming on the social media platforms. It's in the shows that they watch. And they do the bait and switch on Disney. And I've been guilty of this too, where I'm like, okay, well, there's one, this is in the past, one Disney show that's okay. This one's innocent enough. And then I watch 3 episodes thinking it's safe. And then I go and do something and chop something up in the kitchen. And then I hear something about, you know, some kind of radical concept they're introducing. And I'm like, what happened here? This is intentional. They know this. They know the behaviors of parents. They know that we work hard and that we're tired and all those things. And they do the bait and switch. And it's the same thing with these entertainment companies. And it's predatory. What they're doing is sexual grooming. It is predatory and they should be prosecuted. Apple, all of these companies should be held accountable for what they've done to children.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. You talk about, you know, some of these people, like you mentioned, Billie Eilish and Travis Scott, you know, that they know it's being targeted to children. To what extent do you think that you had alluded to this a little bit before, you know, that there are some puppeteering? We do know some of these Hollywood, you know, icons do get groomed and they themselves are trafficked, they're MK Ultra. And so they may be aware that their audience is children, but they may be literally controlled. So how can we attack that? I think that's a huge problem, right?
It is. Well, the number one thing we can do is reduce the demand. And we do that by unplugging from it. Because if there's no demand, they're not going to have a need or see the value in taking children and exploiting them in films like Cuties, right? They're going to stop doing that if people truly call up Netflix and say, this is disgusting. You guys take public stances on BLM, but you don't want to remove pedophilia, and we'll take a public stance on that being inappropriate and not acceptable. I'm withdrawing my subscription. If every American did that, their stock prices would go. I mean, they would fall. They would collapse as a company. But it's us. It's us. It's our culture that is sick, that is driving the demand for this. And as long as that is taking place, there will be another Britney Spears. There'll be another Christina Aguilera. There'll be another girls exploited, and boys too. And that's what. And I believe that Britney Spears is a victim of sexual exploitation, child trafficking, and an adult, from what we know as well, for cases as an adult was being trafficked as well. Yeah. You know, and these are really hard realities, really sad. But
she's really trying to expose it, but she's so caught in the matrix.
Because this is the thing that, again, like I alluded to earlier, is they control you. You sign a contract. You don't get to just say whatever you want. I mean, how many of them do we know that are ever allowed to just talk politics that deviate from the mainstream acceptable narrative. They're literally puppets. They're mouthpieces for every acceptable narrative they're allowed, whether it's, pro-vax stuff or, anything that they're supposed to be, the mouthpieces for. If they deviate from that, they're canceled. They're rid of. And that's how we know that is the role. And, you just ask anybody who's been in the industry, hey, what would happen, if you spoke out on this? Oh, they'll tell you what will happen.
For sure, for sure. So you've mentioned some big companies, and certainly that's actually like hopeful to me, because we can, boycott to some extent, although I don't really think boycotts are that effective. I think boycotts are pretty effective. Just throughout history, what we've seen, boycotts seem to be a lot more effective than a boycott. Not that I'm saying people should not support things they don't support, right? So I think, just morally, that might be a really good angle. But who do we think is behind all of this? Because, we know that the corporations are, that we're really in the age of it's like a fascist, technocratic, transhuman global agenda that we're dealing with here. And there are global elites, as both of us have been talking about. And, most of these global elites really are, I'm just going to say it, but they are kind of, occultists. They have beliefs that may be antithetical to American values, to, to things that might be good for children, So yeah, who's behind this, and how can we deal with that?
Well, I'm not an expert on the occult practices or who specifically. I mean, I know obviously George Soros is one such elite that is, committed to destroying America and has said things. So, that's just what I know and can verify as somebody that one person's name that is involved directly right now in our elections, in appointing prosecutors that are lenient on the crimes that I focus on, child exploitation, child trafficking. So that's one person that I can definitely say, people should research all the organizations, Open Society, all the ones that trickle down from there that are, fronts basically for other social justice causes, are all connected and benefit these elites. So that's just one that I would feel comfortable throwing out. But, again, I'm not an expert on these elites at the top of the whatever the chain here.
Yeah, sure. I guess the only reason I ask is that I'm kind of like, if you are, you had said we're in a war, right? This is a psychological, spiritual warfare that we are really engaged in. I think there are many other types of warfare at play currently. Right. But if we're at a war, I think about it kind of like you need to know who your enemy is in order to know how to best target them, right? And how to best combat them. So that's the only reason I ask, because we know that in a lot of ways these organizations, these corporations are in some ways puppets also. Yes, there's money involved, but so many of them are conglomerates. And, this is just my personal pet peeve, but, everybody likes to, not everybody, but a lot of people argue, well, they're private companies. I'm like, they're not so private if they're tied to the government, It's like, if the government is, or government entities are pulling the string, then they're not really private, right? It's a fascist system. Yeah. So, yeah.
Right. Especially if you're, like Amazon, who they don't pay taxes, but it's, it's interesting too. I think studying the enemy too, in the area of my expertise is understanding the behavior. So if I understand the behavior, I know how to counter that, in an effective way. If I understand how they're manipulating people to be pawns in that game, then we can manipulate that and counter that effectively. But I think that there should be, and hopefully are, people exposing those people at the top, and they should be held accountable.
Yeah, no, I hope they will be, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So what are, with your organization, when did you start this? How recently was it?
Well, I mean, I've been working on it for over a year of just bringing it together. And we had our official launch a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I wanted to go. Yeah.
I know, yes. And so that was amazing. And we've gotten great feedback and, generous donations and all of that. So we are now just in the process of putting together our teams for those specific missions and starting those off. So while we have some missions that were ongoing with the Earn It Act and the border and side stuff that I do individually as an activist, exposing YouTube kids and things like that, we will merge all of those efforts together that currently all of our partners are doing and all of our activists. And that will be available on the website as it grows. So I'm really excited to see that all come together.
Oh, that's awesome. What are some of the missions you're like starting on now?
Well, like I said, the border is a huge one. Submitting FOIA requests is the next step for us. That process, that legal process of fighting with the government to, number one, release the information that's happening. Catholic Charities needs to be investigated. I can't say too much about some of the stuff, the internal investigation side of how we're doing this, but that has to be uncovered first for people to then ask for that for us to ask for that activism step of why the next step is needed. So I'm not sure if we're going to find it most productive to do another border march, or if we're just going to, release these in a media format that people can watch wherever they are and take action. So that's one aspect. The other one is our freedom model. It's an ebook. It's free and it'll be available to the public. This is our, manual to combat this strategy. And then after that, it's exposing the exploding global sexual rights agenda trickling in via comprehensive sexuality and sexual grooming in schools, and how to dismantle that agenda. And that is going to be a multi-part media video series on that topic, while at the same time giving people tangible, actionable things they can do.
Ah, that's awesome. Really awesome. Yeah. So what are ways that people can support you and help you with this? Yeah.
So, well, you can follow me at Landon Starbuck and help me share content. I'm censored just like any other loud person. And we need help pushing the content. So if you find it valuable, something that you think is other people should know about, please share it. Follow me at freedomforever.us. That's the website. Go to that, not follow me because I'm not there, but the Freedom Forever website. Sign up. You can text 59925, text freedom to that number and get on our activism text blast, so that basically we have forms sometimes that you can just sign and be done with that activism, and it contributes significantly to the missions of what we're working on. So those are a couple ways you can get involved, and just stay tuned, sign up, because we have a monthly email letter of ways you can get involved, and financially contributing so that we can self-sustain these efforts. We're a volunteer-based organization. We don't take salaries. So we just need to be self-sustainable. We're not looking to raise millions and trillions of dollars. We just need to keep the operation scalable and growing so that we can cover more missions.
Awesome. Awesome. And how did you come up with the name? It's Freedom Forever. Is this the logo behind you?
Yes, Freedom Forever. Well, I drew the correlation because I had to stop fighting for children for a minute and realized that if we don't have freedom, there's no point trying to fight against child exploitation and trafficking. If this country turns into a communist socialist hellhole, we won't be able to get a hold of that at all. If these companies get even more power, if they're not held accountable. And so I recognize that to fight for children, I would have to put that on pause for a moment and fight for freedom for the individual, because it's our involvement that is going to stop the epidemic of child trafficking, child exploitation, and just human trafficking as a whole. And if we're disempowered, nothing gets done in that space. So I recognize that freedom is essential. And then obviously freedom for all, all children, freedom from exploitation, freedom that they deserve a childhood free of exploitation. And so, I thought about that and how serious I'm about this mission. It's forever. I want it to be something that is a legacy to, that my children carry on, or whoever else is going to take that torch. I hope that when I'm dead, that Freedom Forever lives on.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I know you have an appointment, so I'm going to be respectful of your time. Do you have anything else you want to add? And I thank you so much for being here today and for what you're doing. So.
Thank you so much for having me. These are really important conversations, and not a lot of podcasts or hosts will embrace this. And I just think you're so awesome for having these deep, difficult discussions and offering this kind of content to people. So thank you for what you do, Courtney, and for having me on today. And I wish I could stay because I just love talking to you. I'll come back soon. Maybe when we have, a new initiative or something, I'll come and share on that. So
we'd love it. Yeah, absolutely. To be continued.
So. Awesome. Great. Thank you guys.